Why did millions of American kids once obsess over springs mounted on wooden boards? What secret lies within that worn-out card tucked away in your father's wallet? These peculiar objects were the very birthplace of Silicon Valley, the place that transformed lifeless components into the world, changing power you now hold in your hands. Do you remember the scent of soldering lead while working with your dad, or that time you pedaled through the rain just to have the shop owner help fix your remote-controlled car? Radio Shack was never just a store, it was America's sole laboratory. But why did an empire that once taught the world how to build the future suddenly flicker out? Let's travel back in time to find the answer. What truly happened to Radio Shack? Chapter 1. The Wall of Gods. The Component Wall. There is a corner in every Radio Shack store that you never forget. It wasn't the checkout counter, nor the shiny new gadgets displayed near the entrance. It was at the very back, where the lights were just a bit dimmer, where tiny plastic drawers were stacked high like a secret wall. Red and white plastic bags dangled from the hooks. Inside were things that seemed meaningless to the uninitiated: a 470 ohm resistor, a capacitor no bigger than your fingertip, a few silent transistors. You didn't walk in there to buy electronics. You walked in there with a mission. Maybe it was to fix your grandfather's old radio. Maybe it was to bring a dead device back to life. And suddenly, the room didn't feel like a store anymore. It felt like a treasure trove. Why did a place full of tiny plastic drawers make us feel like we were standing in the presence of something important? Perhaps because, for the first time, you were no longer just a consumer. You were the one who understood how things worked. In that corner, you didn't buy a finished product. You bought the pieces of possibility, and when you held them in your hand, there was a strange sensation, as if the world were no longer a black box. It was a system, and if you were patient enough, you could crack it open, fix it, and even master it. And then, there was always that person behind the counter. He didn't wear a suit. He didn't read from a sales script. He was usually a middle-aged man, perhaps a bit quiet, but his eyes would light up the moment you handed him a scorched circuit board. You didn't have to explain much. He'd take a look, think for a few seconds, turn around, pull open a small drawer, and place exactly what you needed into your palm, like a very ordinary kind of magic. Today, you can walk into a massive electronics superstore where everything is bright and modern. But how many people there can look at a transistor and tell you the difference between NPN and PNP without looking it up? Radio Shack didn't just sell components. It preserved knowledge, and more importantly, it handed that knowledge back to you. Then came December. There was something almost sacred for many families, the thick catalog that arrived in the mail. The pages felt slightly rough, the scent of the ink was unmistakable, and every page you flipped opened up a new dream. You could sit for hours, circling items, imagining a robot kit, a build-your-own radio, or something you didn't quite understand yet, but you knew you wanted to touch it. In those days, joy didn't come from instant gratification. It came from the waiting, from the imagining, from the belief that one day you could build something of your very own. Were we happier when we moved at that slower pace? Or perhaps what we truly miss isn't the stuff. It's the feeling that we could understand and with our own two hands build the world around us. Chapter 2. The Science Fair, Kits and the Screech of the Future. There is a moment that so many American children once experienced, a small moment perhaps, but one powerful enough to change how they saw the world forever. It didn't come from a glowing screen. It didn't come from an app downloaded in seconds. It came from a wooden board, a few stray wires, and tiny metal springs, the Science Fair 150-in-1 kit. At first glance, it looked like a toy. But the moment you opened that box, you realized this was no toy. This was a laboratory. You took those thin wires and clipped them into the springs according to the printed diagrams. Everything looked a bit messy, a bit confusing. Maybe you weren't entirely sure what you were doing. Then you snapped in the battery, and suddenly, beep. A sound rang out. a pulse of life. Not from a device you bought off a shelf, but from something you built with your own two hands. Do you remember that feeling? The moment your heart beat just a little faster when you realized that this pile of lifeless wires had just become responsive. Something alive in its own way. That was the first time many of us understood a simple yet profound truth. The world is not magic. It is governed by laws. And if you learn those laws, you can create magic of your own. Radio Shack didn't just sell kits. They handed you a very specific kind of power, the right to understand. Then, there were the families who brought the future right onto their kitchen tables. It didn't come in the form of a thin, sleek, shiny machine like we have today. It was a clunky, heavy block of plastic. The TRS-80. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't fast. It wasn't user-friendly. The screen displayed nothing but glowing green text. The keyboard clattered. And every time you saved data, the cassette recorder emitted a long, high-pitched screech, almost haunting. But you sat there anyway, waiting. Maybe for 10 minutes. Maybe 15. Just to load a short string of code. You barely dared to breathe. You didn't dare touch the wires. Because one tiny glitch, and everything would have to start all over again. Have you ever experienced that feeling? That held breath, staring at the screens, and then, when the cursor began to blink exactly as you had programmed, you almost wanted to scream with joy. No one gifted you that experience. You had to be patient. You had to trial and error. You had to understand. And because of that, it belonged to you. But perhaps the most extraordinary thing lay in the details that many people didn't even notice. The instruction manuals. Today, when you buy a piece of tech, you usually get a thin manual, just enough to show you how to turn it on. But back then, Radio Shack did something very different. They gave you the schematics, not a simplified version, not a hidden version, but the entire brain of the device, drawn out, detailed, and clear. They didn't just tell you how to use it. They showed you how it worked. And deeper than that, they were subtly telling you one thing. You are capable of understanding this. Even further, you are allowed to change it. How many companies today would dare to do that? How many devices do you use right now where you actually understand what's inside? Or have we become accustomed to standing on the outside, touching a screen, and accepting that the inside is a black box that we don't need or aren't permitted to understand? Why is it that, once upon a time, companies believed users were smart enough to look directly into the brain of the machine? And at what point did they decide we should only be passive users? Perhaps the answer doesn't lie in the technology itself. It lies in how technology began to change its very nature. And it was right here that the story of Radio Shack began to take a very different turn. Chapter 3. When Death was named Sprint. One day, you walked into Radio Shack and realized something wasn't right anymore. The doors were the same. The red sign was still hanging there, but the feeling had shifted. You looked around. The familiar component shelves, the ones that used to be the wall of gods, had been pushed to the back. They were smaller, dimmer, inexplicably thinner. In their place were rows of shiny mobile phones, big boxes, big posters, big slogans. And in the middle of it all, a young employee approached you. Not to ask what you were fixing, not to look at the circuit board you had brought along, but to ask, have you thought about signing up for a Sprint plan? You only needed a fuse, yet you were dragged into a conversation you never wanted to have. It wasn't Radio Shack anymore. It was no longer the place you went to understand the world. It was no longer the place where someone helped you revive something thought to be broken. It had become a sales kiosk, cold, fast, and somehow distant. Radio Shack didn't vanish instantly. It changed bit by bit. And perhaps the most painful part wasn't the end itself. It was the fact that you watched it turn into something else right before your eyes. Around that same time, the familiar names began to quietly disappear. Realistic, Optimus, Micronta. Those weren't just brands. They were the names you saw on the radio in your living room, on the speakers in your garage, on the devices you once repaired with your own hands. They weren't flashy, they weren't high-end, but they were reliable. They were a part of everyday life, just as Radio Shack had once been. Then one day, you didn't see them anymore. There was no grand goodbye. No clear moment of closure. They just faded away. Why does it ache to see an old sign being taken down? Even if maybe we hadn't stepped foot inside that store for 10 years. Perhaps because we aren't really mourning the store. We are mourning the person we used to be back when we still walked through those doors. And then, years later, Radio Shack is no longer on that familiar corner, but it still exists in a very different way. In cardboard boxes in the basement, in a corner of the garage, in drawers you haven't opened in a lifetime. You pull a box out, a thin cloud of dust rises. Inside are old wires, a science fair kit, a radio that stopped working long ago. You crack it open, tiny screws, familiar circuit boards. And then you see it, an orange capacitor with a tiny Radio Shack logo printed on the side. A very small detail, but enough to pull an entire era back into view. Do you smile? Or do you feel a little sting? Because that isn't just a component. It's a trace of a time when technology wasn't something you just used, but it was something you could touch, understand, and make your own. Radio Shack was never just a parts store. It was a place that quietly taught millions of Americans a rare and vital lesson. You don't have to fear technology. You can crack it open, you can understand it, and if need be, you can fix it with your own two hands. In today's world, where everything is designed to be closed, where you're meant to only use but never touch what's inside, the legacy of Radio Shack becomes even clearer. When it vanished, we lost more than just a place to buy batteries or cables. We lost a sanctuary where curiosity was encouraged, where mistakes were allowed, and where an ordinary person could feel like a master of the world around them. Perhaps that's why the memory of it has never truly left us. Tonight, try opening an old box in your garage. If you still have a science fair kit or a realistic radio, share your story in the comments below. These memories deserve to be reconnected. And if you want to continue this journey of finding the missing pieces of the past, don't forget to subscribe. A and P, Piggly Wiggly, or a Safeway with that classic arched roof. If these names ring a bell, you lived through America's true golden age. Remember gripping your parents' hands as the cart rattled down familiar aisles? Back then, shopping wasn't a chore, it was a neighborhood ritual. But today, those iconic storefronts have quietly vanished, taking a piece of our history with them. Join me now as we take a trip down memory lane to revisit 15 lost icons, to find a piece of childhood that perhaps you've accidentally left behind. A and P. Do you know who the forefather of the retail giants dominating America today was? It was A and P. For many families, it wasn't just a place to buy groceries, it was a cornerstone of daily life. You'd walk in and see small shelves packed closely together, people brushing past one another to pick their items, and familiar clerks greeting you with a smile. It wasn't flashy and it wasn't overly spacious, but it felt like home. What made A&P the Walmart before Walmart wasn't just its size, it was the way they reimagined retail. They were among the pioneers who brought private label products to the masses, keeping prices low without sacrificing quality. They expanded at an unprecedented pace, building a nationwide network of stores when that concept was still brand new. With A&P, grocery shopping was no longer just a daily errand, it became a system, a habit, a part of the American heartbeat. But then, that very same massive scale became its weakness. As the market began to shift toward larger stores, more variety, and modern experiences, R and P was slow to react. They were too accustomed to the old ways, too big to change quickly. And gradually, the name that once dominated the nation began to fade. The biggest brand in America could not survive the very future it helped create. Piggly Wiggly. If A&P taught America how to scale, then Piggly Wiggly completely changed the way people shopped. Before they came along, grocery shopping wasn't what you'd imagine. You didn't walk the aisles picking things out yourself. Instead, you stood at a counter, handed your list to a clerk, and they fetched every item for you. It was fast, but there was no choice, no sense of discovery. Then Piggly Wiggly arrived and changed everything. For the first time, customers were allowed to walk the aisles, pick up products with their own hands, compare them, and decide for themselves. It was an idea that seemed simple, yet it was revolutionary. Because it didn't just change how we bought things, it changed how shopping felt. Suddenly, going to the supermarket became an experience. You could linger at the bakery, ponder what to cook for dinner, and discover things you never knew existed. That was the moment America fell in love with the freedom of choice. Jitney Jungle. In another corner of America, especially in the South, Jitney Jungle offered a completely different kind of experience. If A&P was the system and Piggly Wiggly was freedom, then Jitney Jungle was the excitement. They were one of the chains at the forefront of the discount and early megamarket models. The spaces were larger, the goods were more plentiful, and most importantly, shopping felt like an event. You didn't just go for a few small items, you went with the whole family. The carts were piled high. Children ran around, wide-eyed at every shelf. Adults discussed what else to stock up on while the prices were good. The atmosphere was always bustling and lively, like a modern-day fairground. The sound of wheels rattling on the floor, the hum of conversation, the voices calling out from the end of the aisle, all of it created an unforgettable memory. It wasn't just shopping. It was a part of the weekend, a part of the family, a part of time spent together. These stores didn't just sell food, they taught America how to shop. But what people remember most isn't the innovation, it's the feeling. Dominic's Chicago. In Chicago, there's a name that, when mentioned, brings back a flood of childhood memories for so many: Dominic's. This wasn't the kind of supermarket you just popped into and left. For many families, it was a place where they truly belonged. You'd walk in, and it felt like everybody knew each other. The staff remembered your name. They knew your usual order. Sometimes it was just a simple hello. But it was enough to make you feel like a neighbor, not just another stranger with a grocery list. Shopping at Dominic's was never rushed. It was a part of the rhythm of life. You'd run into neighbors in the produce aisle. Your parents would stop to chat for a few minutes with a familiar cashier, and you, as a child, just stood there, taking it all in, never realizing that these ordinary moments would one day become precious memories. But then, things began to change. Labor strikes, rising costs, and more importantly, a slow pace of innovation. As competitors grew more modern, faster, and cheaper, Dominic stuck to its old ways, and gradually, that sense of belonging was no longer enough to keep the doors open. Waldbaum's New York. In New York, Waldbaum's wasn't just a store, it was a fixture in the neighborhood. You didn't have to drive far. You didn't need to plan ahead. A short walk of just a few minutes, and you were in a familiar space. Quiet streets, families walking hand in hand to get their groceries, kids running ahead while the adults chatted behind, it all created a rhythm of its own. Waldbaum's lived in those small moments. It wasn't loud or flashy. It was simply always there, exactly when you needed it. A loaf of bread for breakfast. A carton of milk for the evening. Small things, but repeated every day, they became a part of the fabric of life. And then one day, it vanished. Not in a loud or dramatic way. There was no single, ending moment, just a gradual closing of doors. The streets remained the same, but something familiar was missing. A piece of the neighborhood's heartbeat had quietly slipped away. Alpha Beta California. If you grew up in California, especially during the years when the West Coast lifestyle was beginning to take shape, then Alpha Beta was part of that scenery. The stores were bright, clean, and organized. The aisles were wider and airier, offering a modern feel that wasn't common everywhere back then. Walking into an Alpha Beta felt like stepping into a future version of shopping. There was a different vibe there, not the old-school neighborhood intimacy, but rather the confidence of a life on the move. An America looking forward, faster, brighter, more convenient. But because of that, as new standards continued to rise, Alpha Beta slowly lost its edge. What was once considered modern became ordinary, and when they no longer stood out, they were gradually left behind. Kohl's, the grocery era. Today, when people hear the name Kohl's, they immediately think of clothes, clearance racks, and those famous coupons. But what not everyone remembers is that Kohl's actually started as a grocery chain. Before becoming a fashion giant, Kohl's was the place where you bought your milk, your bread, and all those other everyday essentials. It creates a strange sensation looking back, as if you're seeing a completely different version of a household name. And that transformation is a story in itself. Some brands vanish, some try to adapt, and some, like Kohl's, change completely to survive. These stores weren't just places you visited, they were the places where you grew up. They weren't just for buying things, they were a part of your childhood, your family, and the daily rituals you never thought you'd lose. White Hen Pantry. There are places that didn't need a massive neon sign to be important. They simply became an essential part of your morning ritual. White Hen Pantry was exactly that kind of place. You'd walk in early, while the world was still quiet. The scent of hot coffee drifted through the air, mingling with the smell of freshly made sandwiches. There were no long lines, no frantic rushing. Just a few familiar faces, maybe a neighbor, maybe someone you saw every single morning, standing there, sharing a few quick words before the day truly began. This was long before Starbucks was on every corner. Before coffee became a brand experience, White Hen Pantry was much simpler. But it was also more real. You didn't go there to check in. You went because it was familiar. Because it was close. Because you knew you'd see a friendly face, hear a bit of news, and carry a sense of warmth with you as you walked out the door. Those small conversations, those simple nods of greeting, that was the true value of the pantry. Grand Union. If White Hen Pantry was the simplicity of the morning, then Grand Union offered an experience that was truly ahead of its time. There, you didn't just buy groceries. You could stop by the cafe. You could visit the pharmacy. It was a space that combined multiple conveniences, something we take for granted today, but back then, it felt revolutionary. Grand Union had a slightly more premium feel. The lighting was softer, the aisles more curated, but it never felt distant. It maintained a sense of closeness, a place where you could do your shopping and then take a few extra minutes to rest, people watch, or simply enjoy the atmosphere. It was the kind of place where you didn't have to rush. You could stay a little longer, and that was perfectly fine. Jewel Osco. For many families, Jewel Osco was the perfect marriage of convenience and memory. You could get your groceries. You could pick up your prescriptions. Everything was under one roof. But what made Jewel Osco truly special wasn't just the convenience. It was the green stamps. Every time you shopped, you'd receive those little stamps. You'd take them home and carefully lick and paste them into a booklet. As a child, you'd sit nearby, eagerly helping, counting every single stamp, waiting for the day there were enough to trade them in for a prize. Maybe it was a small toy. Maybe it was something for the kitchen. It wasn't about the monetary value, it was about what it represented. Because that wasn't just a gift. It was the result of countless trips to the store with your parents. It was a collection of moments accumulated over time. It was the anticipation, the excitement, and finally, the joy of redeeming something you'd earned. Those tiny little stamps held some of our biggest memories. In those days, the supermarket wasn't just a place you visited and left. They were places where you paused, where you connected, where tiny everyday moments grew into lifelong memories. And that is why, as these places began to fade away, what we lost wasn't just a place to shop. We lost a window of time that nothing else can ever truly replace. Pantry Pride Food Fair. There was a time when grocery shopping was inseparable from the shopping malls rising up across America. Pantry Pride and Food Fair were part of that era, a time when shopping wasn't just a necessity, but a weekend ritual. You'd walk in and the first thing you felt was convenience. Prices were lower thanks to their private label goods. The shelves were overflowing with a vast variety of choices. Families would push their carts through every aisle, shopping while soaking in the bustling energy of a rapidly growing America. It was the moment when shopping began to mean more than just buying things. But behind that rapid expansion were financial cracks that weren't visible to everyone. As costs rose and competition grew fierce, these models began to shake. And then, one by one, they vanished from the malls that were once so full of life. Lucky stores. Lucky stores didn't just sell products, they sold an idea. Shopping is luck. It was a simple slogan, but it was enough to make the entire experience more exciting. You weren't just running an errand. You felt like you were striking gold every time you found a great item at a fair price. Lucky invested heavily in their brand. From the signs and the colors to the way the displays were set up, everything was designed to create a distinct feeling. It wasn't just the store that was closest to you, it was the store you wanted to go to. But as the market changed, and as price became a harder factor than emotion, these brand stories slowly lost their power. Luck was no longer enough to compete with new models, where everything was optimized down to the last penny. Safeway, the vintage marina style. You only had to see that iconic winged or curved roofline, and you immediately knew it was the Safeway of yesteryear. That wasn't just an architectural design. It was a landmark. You'd drive up, spot that familiar silhouette from a distance, and know exactly where you were. Inside, everything followed a clear logic. It wasn't overly fancy, but it was enough to make you feel comfortable and at home. Details like that, seemingly small, became anchors for our memories. Because they were repeated time and time again until they were etched into your mind. And then one day, those designs disappeared. The stores were remodeled, made modern, efficient, and sleek. But with that change, the sense of familiarity began to fade away. Winn-Dixie, the golden era. To many, especially in the South, Winn-Dixie wasn't just a supermarket. It was a place you trusted. You'd walk up to the meat counter, and behind it was a person you had probably seen dozens of times before. They knew exactly how to cut your meat just the way you liked it. They could give you advice. And most importantly, you trusted them. You trusted the guy behind the counter. That was a very simple relationship. But it's one that is incredibly rare in today's world. It wasn't about the brand. It wasn't about the price. It was about the human touch. Looking back now, we suddenly realize a bittersweet truth. In the old days, going to the grocery store wasn't just about grabbing a few items and rushing out. It was an experience. You took your time. You went with your family. You saw familiar faces. You remembered the scents, the sounds, and the narrow paths between the shelves, All of it formed a very real part of daily life. But now, everything is faster, cheaper, more efficient. You go in, grab what you need, scan your items, and leave. No talking, no pausing, no real reason to stay a moment longer. And perhaps that is what has changed the most. We didn't just lose the old stores, we lost the feeling of belonging somewhere. We didn't just lose stores, we lost a way of life. So what about you? Which store did your family consider home every weekend? Is there a specific central sound that you'd recognize even with your eyes closed? Please leave a comment below. I'll be reading and responding to every story because each of your comments isn't just text, it's a journey back in time that we're taking together. I'll see you in the comments. And in our next journey to rediscover the America of old,